Inside the courtroom, with its dark wooden walls and dim golden lighting, a solemn atmosphere loomed. The murmurs gradually faded as Judge Morgan entered, his stern black robe flowing as he took his high seat. His composed face held sharp eyes that scanned the two people standing opposite each other at the trial podium. Sarah Thompson, a beautiful woman whose face now bore the weariness of time, stood straight. Her neatly pressed blue dress could not hide the tension in her shoulders. Beside her, two young girls, Emily and Sophie, aged 10 and 12, sat quietly, their round eyes watching their parents argue. They did not fully grasp what was happening, only that their family was standing at a crossroads from which there was no return. David Thompson, a successful businessman, clad in a well-tailored dark suit, yet beneath the lights, the dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. A man past 50, his hair streaked with gray, yet his posture remained dignified. Opposite him was the wife who had stood by his side for over 20 years, the woman who once meant everything to him. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice firm yet emotional, as she presented her reason for seeking divorce. "Your Honor, I can no longer live in a loveless marriage. He no longer cares for me as he once did. Work, money, and outside relationships seem to matter more to him than his wife and children. I need love, not lavish gifts or endless business trips. I have been patient. I have tried. But a marriage cannot survive on one-sided efforts." David furrowed his brows, his tone calm but carrying an underlying frustration. "Sarah, you say I don't care about the family, but have you thought about the countless nights I stayed up late working just so I could take you and the kids on vacations? Those gifts weren't just material things. They were my efforts to give you and our children a better life." Sarah crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow in mockery. "Do you think a luxury vacation can replace the warmth of a family dinner? And do you remember your promise to buy me a brand new sports car? You've delayed that for 2 years now, yet you had no problem investing millions into your company projects. Is that your way of showing care for your wife?" David sighed, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, you know full well that company funds cannot be used for personal expenses. I've always tried to balance work and family, but throwing money around isn't the only way to express love." Sarah smirked, a cold laugh escaping her lips. "Then what about all the times I had to go to the spa alone, book vacations by myself, because you were always busy? Other men take their wives out, cherish them. But what about me? I feel like an abandoned housewife trapped in a lifeless mansion. I didn't marry you to be a decorative doll." David clenched his fists, but kept his voice steady. "Sarah, do you know how many people would dream of having the life you have? You have everything. You don't have to worry about money. You're free to do whatever you want. And yet you're still unsatisfied. You don't care about what I've done to sustain this life." Sarah scoffed. "So you think I should be grateful for living in luxury while you chase after work? I need a husband, David, not an unlimited bank account. And don't forget, I asked you to hire extra help because I didn't want to deal with trivial house chores. But you stubbornly refused." David frowned, clearly losing patience. "Sarah, we already have 2 full-time housekeepers. How many more do you need?" Sarah shrugged. "Then why do I still have to clean my own room? I shouldn't have to do such things. If you truly cared about me, you would have hired more help." The tension in the courtroom thickened. A few spectators whispered among themselves. The two daughters huddled closer, unable to understand all the words, but sensing the growing divide between their parents. Judge Morgan raised a hand, signaling for order, before looking at both of them with a knowing yet firm gaze. Both parties have their arguments. However, the court must consider the legal matters at hand, particularly child custody and asset division. Before proceeding, I need both parties to confirm. Are you certain that divorce is the final decision? Sarah looked at David. A flicker of hesitation crossed her eyes, but then she took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I have thought long and hard about this decision. I cannot continue living in loneliness while still having a husband. David tightened his grip on the table, but after a moment he too nodded, his voice rough. If this is what you want, I will accept it. But I don't believe I have done anything wrong. The courtroom remained tense as the arguments continued. Sarah insisted she had done everything she could to salvage their marriage, but could no longer endure the emotional distance. David defended himself, asserting that he never neglected his family and had always been a responsible husband and father. Judge Morgan took notes on the key points, then glanced at the file before him. A thick document lay open, containing the results of a test neither of them had yet seen. Judge Morgan adjusted his glasses and turned his attention to the two daughters sitting quietly beside their mother. His voice was steady yet gentle. Emily, Sophie, the court would like to hear from you. You are not required to speak, but if you wish, you may share your thoughts about your father and your family life. Emily, the older of the two at 12, shifted nervously in her seat. She looked at her father, who was trying to offer her a reassuring smile despite the pain in his eyes. Taking a deep breath, she straightened up and began speaking. My dad is a great dad. I know he's very busy, but whenever he's home, he always spends all his time with us. He never ignores us. Whenever I struggle with my math homework, he's the one who helps me. He explains things patiently, even when I get frustrated. Sometimes he even turns it into a game so I don't feel bored. She paused for a moment, her voice filled with emotion. Every morning when he's home, he braids my hair before school. He's not very good at it, but he tries so hard to make it just the way I like. There were mornings when he was late getting up because he had worked late the night before, but he still patiently brushed through every tangle in my hair. On weekends, he takes us out for ice cream to the park. Last month, he surprised us with a trip to the aquarium. He told us he was really tired after an important meeting, but he still took us because he promised. And he never breaks his promises. She swallowed, her eyes brightening with fond memories. Dad even makes us pancakes for breakfast. I remember one time he burned the whole batch, but he just laughed and said he'd try again. Sophie and I helped him redo everything, and it was the best breakfast I ever had. David sat still, his jaw tightening. His eyes shimmered with emotion, but he kept his composure. Judge Morgan nodded before turning to Sophie, the younger one. She was only 10, but her voice was firm. Daddy is the best. When he's home, he plays dolls with me, even though I know he doesn't really like it. But he still does all the voices and makes the funniest stories. And whenever I can't sleep, he sings to me, even though his singing is really bad. Sophie giggled, making some people in the courtroom smile. Then her expression turned serious. He always makes me feel safe. No matter how tired he is, if I have a bad dream, he lets me sleep in his arms until I feel better. I remember one time I had a high fever, and he stayed up all night with me, placing a cool cloth on my forehead and never leaving my side. He always tells me he loves us. When he's home, I never feel like he's too busy for us." Sarah shifted slightly in her seat, but remained silent. David swallowed hard, running a hand over his face, as if holding back the emotions welling up inside him. Judge Morgan nodded, jotting down a few notes before turning to the household staff, who had also been called as witnesses. The family's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, a kind woman in her 60s, stood up. "Your Honor, I have worked for the Thompson family since Emily was a baby. Mr. Thompson is a busy man, but whenever he is home, he prioritizes spending time with his daughters. There were nights when he would come home past midnight, but instead of going straight to bed, he would check on the girls, tuck them in, and sometimes just sit there watching them sleep. I have seen him so exhausted that he could barely stand. But if Emily or Sophie asked for a bedtime story, he would still sit with them and read until they fell asleep." She turned to David, offering a gentle smile before continuing. "He doesn't just give them material things. He gives them his time, his love, and his presence. I remember once, even during a phone meeting, Sophie ran up to him with a drawing she made. He stopped everything for a few minutes just to praise her. No matter how long he's been away, the moment he steps through that door, he becomes Dad first and foremost." Judge Morgan let out a deep, contemplative sigh before turning to Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, would you like to respond?" he asked, his tone neutral. Sarah pressed her lips together, her gaze wavering. She seemed to be searching for an answer, but after a long pause, she simply shook her head. David, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I know I'm not perfect. I know I've missed moments, but whenever I had the chance, I made sure my family came first. My daughters know that. And to me, that's what matters most." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of his words pressing on everyone present. Judge Morgan looked at his notes, then at David, his expression unreadable. Judge Morgan let out a quiet sigh, set his pen down, and directed his sharp gaze toward Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, the court has heard testimonies from your children, the household staff, and Mr. Thompson himself. All of them have described him as a devoted father who, despite his busy schedule, always makes time for his family. None of them feel that he has been neglectful or irresponsible. So tell me, why are you still determined to proceed with this divorce?" Sarah bit her lip, her eyes wavering for a moment before she regained her pride. She lifted her chin, her voice laced with frustration. "Your Honor, this isn't about whether he's a good man or not. The issue is that I am not happy in this marriage anymore. I feel trapped. I feel like I've lost myself. I don't want to keep living a life where every day feels exactly the same." A strange silence filled the courtroom. A few people frowned slightly, but Sarah didn't notice. She continued speaking, her voice rising with emotion. "He might be a good father to our children, but what about me? He never makes time for me. When he's home, all he does is play with the kids, read books to them, take them to the park. And what about me? Am I not part of this family? Am I not his wife? Or am I just a woman who exists to take care of the house while he's busy with his own life?" David, who had remained silent for most of the trial, finally furrowed his brows and spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Sarah, have you ever told me you felt this way? If you were feeling lonely, why didn't you talk to me? I have always tried my best to give our family the best life possible. I never knew you felt like this." Sarah crossed her arms and let out a sarcastic chuckle. "You didn't know? Of course you didn't know, because all you care about is work and the kids. Have you ever really looked at me? Do you even remember the last time you took me out to a nice restaurant without the kids? Or the last time you asked me how I was feeling? I don't need a husband who just works and comes home to play with the children. I need a man who prioritizes his wife." Judge Morgan narrowed his eyes slightly. "Mrs. Thompson, are you saying that you want a divorce because your husband loves his children and works to support his family?" Sarah frowned, clearly displeased with how the judge had phrased it, but she still pressed on. "No, what I'm saying is, I want to feel important. I want to feel special. I don't want to always come second to his job and the kids. I want a man who spoils me, takes me on trips, buys me things, and treats me like he did when we first fell in love. But him? He's always tired, always thinking about work, always focused on the children. And me? What have I become in his life? A shadow? A woman who's just there, unnoticed and unappreciated." Judge Morgan remained silent for a moment before he calmly asked, "Before we proceed, I want both of you to answer this question. Throughout your years of marriage, has either of you ever done anything to wrong the other?" David didn't hesitate. He looked up, his voice steady and sincere. "If my mistake is working too much to provide for my family, then yes, I'm guilty. If my mistake is spending too much time with my children, then I'll accept that as well. But I have never betrayed my wife, never lied to her, never done anything that would hurt her. I always believed that if I worked hard enough, my family would be happy. Maybe I was wrong to think financial security was enough to sustain a marriage, but I have never disrespected or neglected my wife." Judge Morgan nodded and then turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, what about you? Is there anything you would like to admit?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. She crossed her arms tightly. "I've done nothing wrong. I just want to live a life where I feel happy. I haven't cheated. I haven't betrayed him. But I also don't want to settle for a boring marriage where I feel like a ghost in my own home. If that's a crime, then my mistake is staying in this marriage for too long." The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. Soft murmurs spread among the audience, and it was clear that many did not agree with Sarah's reasoning. Judge Morgan slowly tapped his gavel against the desk. "The court will now consider all aspects before making its final decision." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah remained defiant, but perhaps even she was beginning to realize that her reasoning was not as justified as she had believed. The courtroom was heavy with tension. Judge Morgan adjusted his glasses, scanning both the plaintiff and the defendant before speaking slowly. "Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the rift in this marriage cannot be reconciled. Mr. Thompson has expressed his desire to maintain the family, while Mrs. Thompson insists on divorce for personal reasons. Upon review, the court finds that this is not merely a matter of communication or responsibility, but a fundamental difference in values and expectations between the two parties." He paused for a moment, glancing at the file on his desk before continuing. "However, before the court delivers the final ruling on divorce and child custody, there is another crucial matter to be addressed. At Mr. Thompson's request, a DNA test was conducted in secret prior to today's hearing. The results will now be made public." The entire courtroom fell silent. Murmurs of speculation rippled through the spectators. Sarah's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock. "A DNA test? When did you request this, and why?" Her voice trembled, laced with both anger and fear. David kept his gaze fixed on the judge, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. Your Honor, I requested the DNA test at the start of these proceedings, not because I ever doubted my children, but because, in recent times, I have come to doubt my wife. I ignored the signs for years, but lately I've realized that the woman standing before me is not the person I once loved and trusted. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Judge Morgan raised a hand, signaling for silence. The judge flipped open the file, his voice steady and authoritative. Under the supervision of legal authorities, the DNA test results have been verified. The court will announce them now. First, we begin with the eldest daughter, Emily Thompson. David held his breath, his hands clenching so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Sarah kept her head down, her body tense. Judge Morgan looked at the document and read clearly. The DNA test confirms that Mr. David Thompson is not the biological father of Emily Thompson. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. No one spoke. David sat frozen, his eyes hollow, as if his entire world had just collapsed. Emily turned to her mother, her voice quivering. "Mom, what does this mean? If Dad isn't my father, then who is?" Sarah remained silent, biting her lip, avoiding her daughter's gaze. David felt as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. His mind went blank, his chest tight with an unbearable ache. Every memory, holding Emily as a baby, teaching her how to ride a bike, comforting her when she cried, felt like a cruel joke. Judge Morgan turned to David, speaking carefully. "Mr. Thompson, do you wish to proceed with the results for Sophie, or would you like to take a moment?" David clenched his fists, his body trembling, but he refused to stop. A small part of him still hoped that at least one of his daughters was truly his. "Read it." His voice was strained, barely above a whisper. The judge nodded and opened the next file. The room seemed to shrink as everyone held their breath. The DNA test confirms that Mr. David Thompson is not the biological father of Sophie Thompson. David felt as if he had been hollowed out from the inside. His hands trembled, his eyes burned. He stared at his hands, the same hands that had cradled Sophie as a newborn, had held her tiny fingers as she took her first steps. And now, those hands were empty. Sophie burst into tears, running to her mother. "Mom, this isn't true, right? If Dad isn't our father, then who is?" Sarah pulled away, her expression unreadable. Her voice wavered. I don't know." Emily and Sophie stared at her in horror. The realization hit them like a freight train. "You don't know?" David let out a bitter laugh, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Oh, how many men were there, Sarah? How many times did you cheat on me that you can't even remember who fathered our children?" Sarah shrugged, her face devoid of remorse. "Does it really matter? You raised them, didn't you? Are you really going to walk away just because of some test results?" Her indifference was the final blow. David rose to his feet, his eyes filled with an unbearable mixture of rage, heartbreak, and betrayal. "Sarah, you didn't just betray me. You stole my identity as a father. You let me believe I was their father for all these years. And you feel nothing? No guilt? No regret?" Sarah exhaled, rolling her eyes slightly. "You can be as dramatic as you want, David, but at the end of the day, they still need a father, and you're the best one they have." David let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "You still think you control everything, don't you? That I'll just stay and keep playing the fool?" Judge Morgan slammed his gavel against the desk. "Order in the court. The next phase of this hearing will determine custody arrangements. David clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay composed. But deep inside, he knew his life as he had known it was over. David sat motionless, his entire body trembling, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Tears welled in his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. Not because he was ashamed, he just didn't want to scare his daughters any further. Emily and Sophie stood together, tears streaming down their cheeks. They couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened, but one thing was certain. David, the man who had loved and cared for them since they were little, was not their biological father. Emily choked back a sob and asked, "Dad, you're still our dad, right? You won't leave us, will you?" Sophie, sobbing, clung to David's arm, her eyes filled with panic. "Dad, don't go. Don't leave us. I don't care what DNA says. I just want you to be with us." Those words shattered David's heart. He looked at his daughters, his children, the ones he had cherished as his own for so many years. No matter how cruel the truth was, his love for them had never changed. Finally, he could no longer hold back. David broke down, pulling both girls into his arms. "I will never leave you. Even if I am not your biological father, I will always be your dad. My love for you isn't determined by a DNA test. You two are my life." Emily and Sophie clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably. The entire courtroom was silent. Many spectators wiped away tears, unable to contain their emotions. Even Judge Morgan had to pause before continuing. He looked down at the three people embracing each other in the middle of the courtroom and solemnly announced, "Considering the current circumstances and the best interests of the children, the court grants full custody to Mr. David Thompson." The courtroom erupted in emotion. Sophie and Emily looked at each other, tears still on their faces, but a newfound joy sparkled in their eyes. They clung to David tightly, as if letting go would make him disappear. Sarah, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "This is outrageous. They are my children. I am their mother. I do not accept this ruling." Judge Morgan banged his gavel firmly, his voice resolute. "Mrs. Thompson, while you are the biological mother of these children, you have not demonstrated responsibility as a parent. Mr. Thompson has been the one raising, caring for, and protecting them from infancy to now. The children themselves have expressed their desire to stay with him. Therefore, full custody is granted to Mr. Thompson. You will retain visitation rights as permitted by law, but this court's decision on custody is final." Sarah's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but quickly realized that no one was on her side. Even her own daughters no longer looked at her. David squeezed his daughter's hands gently, kissing each one on the forehead. "I will protect you, as I always have. We will get through this together, okay?" Emily and Sophie nodded vigorously, refusing to let go of their father. Sarah collapsed into her chair, her eyes empty. For the first time in this trial, she realized she had lost everything. No husband, no family, no children. Everything she once took for granted was gone. When the trial concluded, she rushed out, but no one paid her any attention. Sometime later, Sarah was fired from her job after her scandalous personal life was exposed. She spiraled into debt, having lived extravagantly without anyone to support her. The superficial relationships that once surrounded her vanished when she no longer had wealth or status. She tried to reach out to her daughters, but both Emily and Sophie refused to see her. their hearts had been closed off by her betrayal. Meanwhile, David continued to raise his daughters with all the love in his heart. He was not just their father. He was their friend, their mentor, their unwavering support. Though the past had left scars, the three of them moved forward together, building a brighter future. In the end, the trial closed with a truly satisfying resolution. David did not lose his daughters, and the girls did not lose their father. True love is not defined by blood, but by sacrifice, devotion, and the years spent together. As they left the courthouse, David held his daughters' hands, leading them away from the pain of the past and into a future still filled with love and hope.